Thank you so much for such a lovely introduction, Jane. I am so glad to be here today. And as you said, sustainability and circularity in particular are my passion, which is why I am delighted to introduce Jonsara Ruth. Jonsara's and my paths have intersected multiple times. And I truly have a lot to thank her for in terms of her knowledge and wisdom in sustainability and healthy living. I am a proud alumni of the Parsons School of Design at the New School where Jonsara teaches. And I have taken the Healthier Materials and Sustainable Building courses at Healthy Material Lab and can truly say it is one of the most illuminating programs in which I have ever participated. Jonsara, who is the design director of the Healthy Materials Lab programs and co-founder with Alison Mills, brings incredible knowledge and science to the interior design world in a way that is grounding, credible, yet accessible. This program's goal is to empower designers in understanding they can make choices as they play a role in people's life. They play a role also in the planet, the future of the planet, as well as in people's health. And that is pretty important. Beyond that, Jonsara is the founding director of the MFA Interior Design Program and associate professor at the Parsons School of Design. Here, she led Aftertaste, a symposium that brings new definitions to the field of interiors. Jonsara is part humanist, studying human experience and perspectives, behavior and health as primary motivations for design. But she's also a designer researcher who brings a supply chain and chemistry-based understanding of the materials used in construction and interior design, a rare combination indeed. And that's not all. Jonsara is the founder of Salty Labs, where she is the designer and artist focused on improving environmental health while creating viscerally designed spaces, events, and furniture. Her previous work included leading designs of furniture for mass production with materials and manufacturing processes that eliminate risks to human health and the environment. Jonsara received a Master's of Architecture from Cranbrook Academy of Art and a BFA in Industrial Design from Rhode Island School of Design. Through her myriad endeavors, Jonsara is making deeply impactful progress toward more sustainable and healthy living spaces. And it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Jonsara Ruth.
Jonsara, your microphone might be muted.
Yes, my microphone was muted as I was gushing about Laurence. Apologies for that. Laurence, it's just really great to be with you again, and thank you so much for that thoughtful introduction. It's also really wonderful to share the Parsons connection, that you graduated from Parsons, and I learned earlier that Jane is also a graduate of Parsons. So there's a lot of Parsons pride here today. Thank you so much. And I guess I would just add to what Laurence said is that I really consider myself a designer constantly rethinking everything I was taught, constantly questioning what I was taught, and continuously learning about how interior design can really make big contributions to the world. And I really think that the promise of interior design is what we can do for communities and for the health and well-being of all people, simply through the decisions that we make. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. For me and at Parsons Healthy Materials Lab, it's this intersection of people and materials, experiences and innovation that drives my passion and our research. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons was established in 2015, in May, to help designers and architects and faculties and students, but really focusing on professionals, to rethink how we make things and to put human and environmental health at the center of all design decisions. Our research team is made up of faculty and student researchers, graduate and undergraduates, and a committee of expert advisors from a variety of fields. We really fundamentally believe in collaboration. And the discipline of interior design is essentially collaborative as well. We combine researchers who come from all areas of study to do our work. And at the foundation of our work, we are supported by a grant from the JPB Foundation with our partners in this work, Green Science Policy Institute, the Health Product Declaration Collaborative, and the Healthy Building Network, with a joint commitment to build the capacity specifically of the affordable housing sector to achieve the widespread use of healthy building materials, reduce toxic chemical exposures in the US building industry, and ultimately to advance healthier lives for the most vulnerable communities. Maybe some of you have seen this film. This is the cover of this film, but it's also the Anthropocene is the term for the current geological age that we're all living in. It's the period now, during which human activity is the dominant influence on the atmosphere, on our environment, on our climate, which we're all feeling the results of recently, and ultimately on everyone's health. I heard someone say recently that humans have given our Earth a fever, and we're trying to help. We're trying to help the health. This is kind of at the foundation of our work. We think about what this state is now. Maybe you've seen some of these other images. This is the one a couple decades old by Edward Bertinsky showing the impacts from manufacturing on the landscape. This is a river that comes from a factory producing nickel in Canada. And in my design work, these kinds of images have a huge impression. The way that our plethora of waste is becoming the landscape of people's lives. This is the Dandora landfill in the outskirts of Nairobi, Kenya. Or the way that our culture exists to demolish and send the waste to landfills. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, over 9 million tons of furniture was thrown away in 1 year, in 2015, and that rate is accelerating. Now, I spent the early part of my career in High Point a lot as I was working for mass manufacturing. So these kinds of statistics really ring true for me, and I'm sure many of you, to question how can we change what we're doing. If we look at housing, actually, there are some really good examples. So it wasn't always like it is now. This is a building made of cast iron parts from Lower Manhattan, and it was designed to be disassembled. It was built in 1849 and disassembled in 1971. So can we return to this way of thinking about design? Can things be designed to avoid landfill? And the design industry, I think, has a huge role to play. So if we become super conscious about all of our design decisions, what we purchase, where we buy from, what the supply chain is, and how to minimize waste in the places we design, then our work can have a huge impact for the planet and for our society and for all people. So here's a few things that drive this thinking. According to the EPA, we are the first generation to spend 90% of our time indoors. And of course, now and in the last year, it's closer to 98% of our time indoors. And indoor air may be 3 to 5 times more contaminated than outdoor air. This is a big statistic, and especially for interior design, because interior designers don't intend to do harm. We choose materials and products that intend to bring good experiences and elevate people's experience in their lives. But the problem is we really don't know all of the invisible substances that we're bringing indoors with the products and materials that we're choosing. Now, this isn't the same for food products, for instance. So here's an analogy. We do know what's inside food products because it's a regulation by the FDA. So we can decide before eating, we can look at the package and we can decide, okay, today I'm going to eat these Doritos, even though it has red number 40 and who knows what's in that. Because I crave Doritos, I'm going to take that risk. And we can make that decision because the FDA requires that these ingredients of consumable food products are labeled. But that's not the same case for design or architecture. This requirement is not the same for building products. The ingredients of common building products is not easy to find. And most designers don't even know that we need to ask for them. So that's the crux of the issue. The materials that are used to make our furniture, our homes, our cities, are actually becoming part of our biological systems. And this is the connection to science that Laurence mentioned. So if we are what we eat, as the saying goes, then we also are where we live. And, you know, these particles, the chemicals that are loose in interior space that come from the products that we bring indoors, can come through breathing them in, or we might ingest them while we're eating, or they can be absorbed through our skin. Now, there can be some short-term effects, and like the ones you might see on the back of a cleaning bottle, but the ones that are of concern are the long-term effects. And these harmful substances are very concerning because these long-term exposures have been linked to serious disease in humans. So many of the products that are typically used in the concurrent construction contain chemicals that are linked to these diseases. And you can see these categories here. So in our work, we look for the materials that eliminate or greatly reduce these harmful chemicals. It wasn't always the case that the building materials and the furniture and the things around us were such a big problem. Actually, before World War II, many more benign materials and products were used to make our buildings. But with the chemical age that began in that era and the development of modern additives in the Industrial Revolution, there's been a huge surge in man-made synthetic products, which include a vast array of untested chemicals that also consume and emit carbon. One of the highest growth materials is polymeric materials. So those are the plastics, the rubbers, the thermoplastics, adhesives, foams, paints, which represent the highest growth area in building materials today. Now, this is of concern because, surprisingly, so many of these chemicals that are used are unregulated. They're just unregulated by the United States government. Actually, only 250 of the 85,000, and I think there's closer to 100,000 now that are in use, have been tested. And only 5 of those have been partially restricted by law. And this is why we as designers need to be much more aware of what we're using in our designs, because regulation isn't there to protect us. There is some movement in this area. There are some chemicals of concern that have been identified, and you might have heard of them, like flame retardants is a big deal in the furniture industry, or phthalates or stain and water repellents. These were indicated as identified in 2009 that they were chemicals of concern, and they're characterized as being severely harmful to the human body, which led to some of the changes we see today. So there is progress, but it's very slow, and we can't wait. So it's clear that we need to learn about these chemicals of concern and do our best to avoid them for ourselves and for our clients. Because there's important new research from the field of public health that's identified, and this is kind of dramatic, but that genetics, which we used to think were responsible for human disease, only 10% of disease is determined by our genetics, only 10%, which means that the other 90% of diseases are a result from the exposures within our environments, the exposure to where we live, the products around us, what we wear, and what we eat. And this field of study is called the exposome. It's defined as the measure of all exposures, including chemical exposures, of us, of an individual in a lifetime, and how these exposures in our lives relate to our health. So this is really what drives our research. We do know that the remaining causes of disease are triggered by economic and social conditions, which comprise these social determinants of health. But this is a really systemic problem, and based in some systemic racism, which is that this map was drawn in 1987 for a report that was published by Dr. Benjamin Chavez, who at that time was the director for the Commission for Racial Justice. And this study revealed each of these dark areas are in neighborhoods that are primarily Black and Hispanic. And this is where the government decided we should put toxic waste sites. He coined the term environmental racism. He actually put out this report in 1987 and thought things would change. But here we are in 2021, and this is a recent map of 25,000 toxic waste sites that are located in these neighborhoods where Black and brown communities live, and a lot of them are in flood-prone areas. And as we see flooding becoming an increasing problem, it means that the chemicals that are near in these flood zones actually make their way into people's neighborhoods and into their homes and into their bodies. And so these folks are exposed to chemical contamination increasingly, at increasing rates. So this is the whole system, and that's how we think about this. If we think about, which brings up another point, we know if we think about the way that plastics are produced, they're produced in these petrochemical factories, which are a huge emitter of greenhouse gas, and therefore huge culprits of climate change itself. In fact, some research states that the plastics life cycle, the whole life cycle of plastics, is the 5th largest contributor to climate change. So you can see how all of these things are related. And our design activism, as some people say, can really reduce our consumption of plastics. It's critical that we change the way that we're doing things so that everybody, all communities, can be healthier, and that we can dramatically reduce people's exposure to and our consumption of materials made from petrochemicals. This is a public health priority. It's a design priority. And so by changing the materials and products that we specify for design, we have the ability to greatly reduce all people's exposure and support people to live healthier lives. So that's the bigger picture. That's the context for what our work is and what we're promoting and what I believe interior designers can really take a stance on. We really have the ability to make people have healthier lives. So let's look at, like, if we just examine one material, let's say paint. We know that paint can create beautiful spaces, and it can create benign, beautiful spaces. And we know from history that paint wasn't always the same, that there used to be lead in people's paint, in paint. But then there was found that lead is actually harmful to people. And these are actually photographs from housing here in New York City, where lead paint still exists. We know that lead paint was outlawed in 1978 because it was found to be harmful to adults. But there's much more to look at in paint. So, we talked about the exposure. I mentioned that, it's about the exposure we have in a lifetime. Paints cover an enormous amount of surface area in interiors, which is why we're focused on paint as one of those primary building materials that we have to be very conscious of. Many typical interior latex paints are not actually latex, they're acrylic. And acrylic, we know, is a kind of plastic, and plastic, we know, is made of petrochemicals, which contain a wide range of toxic substances. We hear a lot about VOCs, but there are many other ingredients in paint that are potentially harmful. So, we can look at, when you open up a can of paint, for instance, it's that first paint smell. That's the VOC smell. That's what you're smelling, these volatile organic compounds. And then we know at the end of paint's life, when it's dried and flakes into the air, that can be another harmful moment. And then that dust can accumulate in the environment and then make its way into the food chain, and we actually ingest that. It can get into the soil, into the water systems. So those are the harmful aspects. But if we dig a little deeper, let's just think about what are the primary components of paints. So paint is made of 4 basic elements. There's binders, there's solvents, there's pigments, and there's additives. If we look at just the binders, their job is to hold all the substances in paint together and form that continuous film that adheres to the surfaces of our interiors. Synthetic binders are often called resins, and there are many different types of resins in coatings, including acrylic and vinyl, both plastic products. And some binders, and this gets into kind of the deep chemistry, and I don't claim to be a chemist, but I do know a little bit, and so some kinds of chemicals are monomers, which means that they're a single structure, and that single ring of a monomer can eventually separate from the coating, shed from the surfaces of our walls and our ceilings into the air and drop to the floor. And that's where a lot of children spend most of their time and can inhale these more invisible kind of chemicals. Solvents in paint are used to mix all the ingredients and coatings together, and they make it easy and fluid for application. Volatile organic compounds, like we know, have been around for a while, and they have been a major driver. The reduction of VOCs have become a major driver in the coating industry, not only because they harm human health, but because VOC emissions was linked to the destruction of our ozone layer, and that was identified. So there's this movement to try to reduce VOCs, but that's not all that's in paint. As we see, pigments are another category, and they provide the color and the opacity to paints. Synthetic pigments were developed to provide colors and coverage that were difficult to achieve with natural pigments. So, for example, titanium dioxide replaced the white lead that used to be put in paint. So titanium dioxide provides a more opaque coating and has less toxicity than lead, but it's still a carcinogen. So there's problems with some of these pigments. And then there are additives, and that's the 4th category, that are materials that are included in small quantities to modify some property of that coating. Some of these are called APEs that are used to emulsify everything together, but new research shows that this group of chemicals is linked with endocrine disruption. So it can cause human bodies towards obesity or diabetes or male reproductive disorders and brain development. This is the scientists looking at this. So, what do we do about this? I mean, it's troubling. It's extremely troubling. And so one of the things that we do is look towards history. Like, wait, it wasn't always this way. What if we just look back for a second? And so we look historically at the ingredients of paint. We find that the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans used different kinds of binders. They used binders made from animal bones or beeswax or eggs, and water was used as a solvent. And then there were 3 basic colors for pigments that were natural pigments. If we look in Italy, for instance, lime putty made from limestone, which is abundant on our planet, was used as the binder. And again, 3 basic pigments, natural pigments, were used to make the color, while water remained as the solvent. In early American civilization, those paints employed binders that could be easily found in the landscape. So like egg yolks from chickens and oils from plants and nuts. So this gives us a hint about what we might do. Historically, those 3 basic binder types were oil-based, water-based, and milk or lime-based paints. But there's been dramatic change in the industry. And so we see now that synthetic binders have replaced all these natural binders, solvents and pigments, and they were developed as alternatives to these historic ingredients. And so although they made paint dry faster or last longer on the shelves of retail stores, which is what a lot of these additives are for, just so that they can put a can of paint on a store shelf for a long time, these synthetic ingredients were never tested for their impact on human health. And that's the crux of the issue. So I like to see this comparison where we look at what the ingredients are in paints, like a typical conventional paint that we use now, and the ingredients in historic lime wash, for instance. And we can see that where the colors are, that those indicate negative health impacts linked to the ingredients. And it's clear that the paint with a lime binder makes a much healthier paint. There are other natural binders that make great paints as well, which are made from milk or proteins or natural latex or linseed oil, other kinds of oils. And now the market is actually growing with these kinds of bases, clay-based paints or lime-based paints or mineral-based paints or even linseed oil paints. There are a lot available on the market right now, which is great. So, we know that this is possible. We know we can switch to healthier paint, that they are available. We just need to be more aware of them, and we need to start working with them. And if we all start working with them, we can drive the market to grow that market and have more surface area in everybody's homes that are healthier. And that would be amazing. And this is the kind of thing that interior designers can do. This is our agency, and it's very exciting. I'll quickly show just a couple other examples. So what about the other surface areas of, where the other materials that have high surface area in our homes, for instance, flooring. If we look at the ubiquitous and the ever popular luxury vinyl tile that's available now almost everywhere, we see that it's made of practically 50% of PVC. And PVC is a known carcinogen and is known as one of the most toxic of all plastics, especially when we examine it through its full life cycle. But, if we look at, for instance, linoleum, which is another kind of rolled or tiled flooring, similar kind of performance characteristics, we see that it's made of linseed oil and wood flour. That the combination of wood flour, wood pulp, and linseed oil makes up about 50% of that product. And these come from the flax plant and from trees, and their impacts on our human health are fairly benign. So you see the comparison. And if we look at the ingredients of building products, could we make our choices, our design and aesthetic choices, based upon this initial piece of research? What is it made of? So if we look just at a simple carpet tile, for instance, you see this long list of ingredients, many of which include polymers and synthetic substances. And there's a diagram here which just shows in each of the layers of a piece of industrial carpet, we can see the kinds of additives in each of these layers. But there are alternatives. This one is a carpet tile made of 70% wool. So they're out there. These alternatives are out there. We just need to find them. If we look at furniture, for example, most furniture these days is treated with stain and water repellents, which is great if you don't want to drop red wine. But it's not so great if you're thinking about the health of a family, because these water repellents, or PFAS chemicals, are linked to kidney and testicular cancer, to the decreased fertility that we see nationwide, and to thyroid problems. So maybe it's worth eliminating some of these stain repellents for the health of our communities. We made this diagram to show that 2 pounds of flame retardants are found in a typical average sofa. Flame retardants are associated with lower IQ in children, as well as fertility issues, endocrine disorders, and cancer. And thankfully, there was a law that was passed in 2013 that we do not no longer require upholstery or mattresses to hold flame retardants. It's not a requirement anymore. And so we can ask our manufacturers to please withhold the flame retardants from the sofas that they're producing. One of the things we're working on now is just examining the range of cabinetry options currently available and then identifying which are the healthier options. So this is the kind of work we look at. And I'm just thrilled to be invited to speak with all of you today, because I really believe that interior design and our design industry as a whole, the manufacturers, the retailers, all of us, have such agency in making change. This framework is the kind of a framework that helps us to interrogate a material and assists our decisions about which material is healthy or not so healthy. And it's a process for sure. We understand that, and so we've dedicated our website to be a resource for others. We do the research and we make our resource available to others through this website. We list things like databases of certified materials, or we curate a small list of materials collections in a bunch of different categories that are typical building categories. And if you go into any one of them, and here's paint, we'll list between 5 and 10 examples of healthier options that are currently on the market today. And when you click on any one of those options, you can see those ingredients that I talked about, and you'll see the kinds of certifications, and then there'll also be a link to a product page. We also, like Laurence mentioned, we also offer courses, short courses and a longer program that will help teach you about how to make these decisions for yourself. They're specifically geared towards interior designers and architects. And what we did was gather 60 experts from around the country and actually around the world who talk about this idea of material health from a variety of perspectives. They're doctors and scientists, as well as designers and architects and sustainability experts that speak on this course. And within this course, you have the opportunity to download many, many worksheets and references that will help you as you're designing to help guide your decision making. We also last year launched a podcast called Trace Material, which I personally love, which explores that intersection of our lives with the lives of materials that surround us. Season 2 just launched this summer, and it tells the stories from the plastic age, exploring the living history of the material from a Bakelite radio all the way to Tupperware to PVC. It's fascinating. Some hosts from our lab do incredible research, and it's very entertaining as well as informative. And then if you're interested in knowing more about our work or staying in touch when we do new research, we're on a bunch of social platforms, Instagram and LinkedIn, as well as Facebook and Twitter. And our website has a plethora of resources about this. Again, and you can follow us or you can subscribe to our newsletter. But again, like I just feel so grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you. I really am an advocate for interior design and the whole industry of interior design to really take charge and take leadership in changing our world to be healthier for all people and for our environment that we're trying to continue to exist upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonsara. That was amazing. It was fascinating / terrifying / inspiring. So I know a lot of people were asking about, they wanted access to the slides, they want access to the recordings, and that will be available to attendees, I think starting next week. So everyone who's missed something, and there was so much to think about, and we need to kind of absorb it, that you will be able to access the program. But so we do have a few questions, including I have a few questions too. We're going to go to our next poll, though, to start. And the question is, how important is it to incorporate healthy materials into your projects? So is it very important to me, somewhat important if it works with the design and the budget, or maybe you never thought about it before, or it's not a priority? And this is a non-judgmental zone, so you can answer however you want. And so while we're waiting for those questions to come in, there's so much to tackle here. I mean, I was thinking about with the paint. Every time I smell a freshly painted room, I think of new beginnings or a fresh start. And I know, now it's like you're just smelling those VOC. So we have to like kind of tweak how we think about things. It's a fascinating topic. There's so much to talk about. But I wanted to ask, so what do you say? You talked about performance fabrics, the stain resistant. So if someone's drinking wine, they don't ruin their couch. What do you say to someone who has a family or a dog? Like, they can't stop drinking wine. So what would you say to them? Like, what would be some suggestions for people who who want to use those types of fabrics for good reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And so I think, your first part of the question is like, how do we change what our behaviors are? How do we change what we assume to be the right thing? And so I'm going to link that answer actually to what you said earlier, which is, we associate a freshly painted room with a fresh start. Well, knowing what we know now, we have to change our mindset on that, right? So we have to say, actually, if it didn't smell so strong, maybe that would be a more fresh start, a fresher start. So similarly, if we think about cleanliness of our sofa or of our fabrics, what if we had slip covers? What if our sofas had slip covers that we could wash? What if we used fibers like linen that are cleanable if you clean them right away? That we don't leave stains there, that we change our behavior, so we use a little soap and water and we clean them right away. We also make the slip covers removable so that they can be washed. Then it's a little bit of a change of behavior, but we don't expose our families to these toxic chemicals, which could have pretty dire effects later on in people's lives. So it's a change of behavior, I think. We can live with healthier products. We just need to live with them differently. And I think that's true for this expectation of paint as well. Like, what I didn't talk about so much is that I became obsessed with this idea about paint, and I spent a sabbatical year following lime paint around the world to just see, like, where has it been used? How has it been used? And like, what can we learn from that? And it was incredible what I saw, and now I'm addicted, totally addicted. I never want to do a project in any other kind of paint again because it's so beautiful. So I think we can change our expectations and our aesthetic expectations as well.
Right. Okay, that's great. Or you can just get like maybe a burgundy colored slip cover or something. I don't know, just to prevent that. That's great though. You're following the paint around the world. I mean, are you writing a book or something on that? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, maybe. I think so. I took, I documented like crazy. Mostly photographs and stories from all these people. It's fascinating.
Very cool. Oh, let's go to the answers for the poll. It looks like. Oh, okay. So most of you went with somewhat important if it works with design and budget. So that makes a lot of sense. And actually, one of our questions was, how does cost drive choosing healthier finishes for interior spaces? So that's always an issue, right? People, maybe they want to be better, but it is going to cost more. So how does that, or the designs are more limited or something? How would you answer that question?
Yeah. I mean, I think cost is always a question for any project, and so we've done a cost comparison also of mineral-based paints, and they're pretty cost competitive. They're mixed differently, and that's what's different. And so one of the challenges is that the price of the material, actually, the price of the lime paint versus Benjamin Moore, say, is not that different. It's not that different in cost. But the labor, the person who's going to paint has to change the way they apply the paint. So for instance, latex paints or the acrylic-based paints were developed so that anybody could go and paint it and it would look fine. Like it's going to remain neutral no matter who applies it. The lime-based paints take a little bit more concentration. They're not difficult. And in fact, somebody who's an expert in it said to me recently, like, I really like the walls that are painted by someone who doesn't know what they're doing because they have more character. So I think the cost question is also, we're talking about labor as well. But, I think when we think about cost, it's not just the cost of the material or even the cost of labor and material. If we think about the bigger picture, it's the healthcare costs. Like, okay, there's paint, but what if you do get a thyroid disorder? Then you have healthcare costs. And then you have costs to your family when people are sick. And then you have all kinds of costs that come with ill health, which are not usually what we think about when we think about choosing a paint color. But that is a very
Right.
serious consideration. So, the healthcare costs in this country are on the increase. The diseases, the plethora of disease is increasing, and so these are the kinds of bigger systemic pieces that we have to think about. Not to mention the cost of the health of people who live near the factories that make paint, or the cost to climate change when we're producing the paint. So the production of paint is actually costing us because of its greenhouse gas emissions. It's costing our planet dire circumstances. So I don't mean to get it is very, for me, this is not theoretical. This is very real. These larger impacts, these larger costs to our whole society are very real.
And we've definitely, in the last just few months, we see, flooding, we see the wildfires. So it's becoming more and more urgent. But it's interesting, though, because it seems people, they think more short-term than long-term. So you might think, I need a pretty color, and you're not going to think about, in 2 decades, I'm going to develop X disease. So that's an issue too. But, that's it's all about being smarter, I guess, about our materials and just being more, be more preventative. I mean, if you take a daily multivitamin or something, or you exercise, you're not doing that short term. That's for long-term health. So that is a very fascinating aspect of it. I did want to ask too, you talked a little bit about cabinetry and how you're working on developing that. I was wondering when that's going to launch, if you had any idea, because I'm going to be doing my kitchen hopefully in the next year, and I need some cabinetry, so I need to know what to look for.
Yeah, no, that's great. We're launching it this fall. I don't have an exact date. I think it should be before mid-October, so it should be pretty soon. It's just coming out, but it's been a really interesting project to examine all the different kinds of substrates and cabinetry that are out there and what are their health impacts. And that was our question. And so we found some pretty interesting answers. So yeah, we hope to share that. And then again, if you sign up with us, subscribe to our newsletter, or follow us, and we'll definitely be announcing the launch of that guide.
I'm just going through some of the comments. People said, love the look of the lime paint, have not used, but hope to soon. So that's awesome.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
there are so
just
many,
really fascinated. Yeah.
I would just say, I was just interviewed by Remodelista. I don't know if they are just making a list of all the different lime paints that are available, the mineral-based, clay-based lime paints that are available, and there's so many more than I had a list of 6 or 8 companies, but I just saw a list that's 20 companies long. They're really increasing, and I think my clients are really interested in the lime paint, the way it looks. It's kind of beautiful. It reflects light in a totally different way than typical paints, because typical paints are made of plastic. We dug into those ingredients. It's plastic. And so there's a sheen, even on the matte paints. They're somewhat reflective. But the lime paints, because they are mineral-based, they have this kind of way of working with the light in a room that is so much more beautiful. And once you experience it, you kind of don't want to go back. And it becomes about the aesthetic, not just about the ingredients. But they're just more beautiful. We sometimes say, you put typical latex paint in a room, it's like living in a plastic bag. We're just putting plastic around ourselves.
Yeah, and someone asked, where can I look up these types of paints, or where are these available? Are they on your website, or is there some resource you can recommend?
Yeah, there's a few of them. There's a few of them listed on our website under the interior paints section of the material collections on our website, and you'll see some. And then there's a bunch of others. Like I said, Remodelista is about to publish a list of a much longer list. There's a few companies, actually a company in South Carolina that we just found that's called Beak. There's a company called Roma Bio. There's a company called Limestrong. There's new companies that are being produced here in the United States which is very cool because a lot of them also are being imported from Europe and from Australia. Bauer comes from Australia. Calc Leader comes from Europe. So there's a bunch of brands, but I checked last night and a lot of them are available here in the United States. You have to dig a little deeper because your local paint company, paint store in New York, the old Janovics or, the paint stores don't necessarily carry them. Home Depot carries one kind of lime paint, which is great. And I think they'll start to, the more that we all demand them, they're going to be more and more available. So let's ask for them.
That's true. Those are great resources. Yeah, exactly. Got to demand it. But I also was curious. So you talked about there's more than 85,000, maybe 100,000 untested chemicals that we're breathing in, working with, et cetera, and only 250 have been tested, which is crazy. It's so overwhelming. Like, what would you say to someone who is just, this is like too much? You really have to want it. You have to be a detective to find out what is going to be a healthy material and what's going to be a bad one. Like, what would you say is like for someone who just feels overwhelmed with all these negative materials?
Yeah. I mean, the first step is just to ask what's inside of this, what's in it, and there are a bunch of certifications now that manufacturers can apply for. It's actually a disclosure document. It's an ingredients label for building materials or for products, and they just voluntarily list here are the substances that are in my product. And there's a list published by Declare. You can get a Declare label or Health Product Declaration label, or simply you can ask the manufacturer, like, what's inside of this material before you decide whether you're going to purchase it or not. And do you know Michael Pollan, Food Rules? Do you know that book or his philosophy?
Yep.
Have you heard of that? Mm-hmm. And one of those rules about, like, am I going to eat it or not, is if you can't pronounce it, you probably don't want to put it in your body. So if you look at an ingredients list and you see there's ingredients that are very long, you might not be able to pronounce, then you might think twice about whether you want to, to purchase it or put it in a home. And then the other, if you wanted to take a step further, there's a great resource put together by a colleague, a partner of ours, called the Green Science Policy Institute. If you go to sixclasses.org, there's a series of videos, and they're very short. They're 4 minutes long. And in fact, we worked with them on these to make them more visually, to bring science and design together. And they tell you what chemicals are in which products and which chemicals you need to avoid. And that's really helpful also. We make lists of examples of materials that we know we've gone through a vetting process and they're healthier. There are other lists like that around. Mindful Materials is a great database of all materials, and it's free. You can look up mindful materials online, and then there's a library, and you can see, thousands and thousands of products, and you can see what their impact is on health, on the environment, on social equity, like that. So there's a lot of different resources, but there are so many, which is why we have a website that lists some of the top trusted sources. We've limited those sources to a handful.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And also your maps about just the social, the racial, I forgot what you called it, with the where the factors are where with low income or Black and brown communities. I mean, that's fascinating too, and that's something we don't think about either. So I think that was really great. But your presentation, you had so much great material, definitely food for thought. And everyone, if you haven't checked out the website, please do. It's full of resources. And the podcast, Trace Materials, is also really fascinating. I listened to one of the episodes this morning. They have the whole season's on plastics. So it's a really great way to, it's like little nuggets of information. So please check that out. And yes, again, the recording will be available next week along with the slides. So, for people who want to re-listen, you will have that chance. So Jonsara, thank you so much. This is fascinating, and we really appreciate you sharing all this material with our attendees.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be part of DX, and I really feel, I know some of this was negative, but sounds like hard, but I really feel like we are the field that can change the world. We can be empowered to change the way the future goes. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Let's band together. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so much.